Saga from Georgia, the brave daughter of the king's treasurer. Chapter 1. The youngest daughter. There was once a just and wise king. Everyone was happy to serve him. If anyone failed to serve him, it was only by disease or old age. Among his servers stood out mainly his treasurer, who over the course of several years, due to his dedication and faithfulness, he was led to execute the most varied and complex missions. But now, having become an already half-decaying old man, he no longer achieved the same performance as before, and besides that, he was beginning to miss his distant family. For it was already more than 15 years ago that he had left his homeland. Thinking about all that, the old treasurer decided to go before the king to ask his sovereign to relieve him from his services. Listening to his justifications, the king said, "You have actually reached an advanced age, and I'm convinced that your duties really weigh upon you and surpass your strength. I will allow then that you leave your services, but only under one condition, which is to send your child in replacement. And if you, for any reason, can't do it, you should come back and continue to serve me as you have done until now." So the faithful treasurer, pleased with the answer given by the king, promised to fulfill his wish, and expecting to hug his children again, he prepared for the trip. He was a widower, and had with his late wife one son and 3 daughters. But deep was his pain, when arriving home, he learned that his only son, comfort of your old age, had died while he was out. And now, his suffering was twofold. For, besides having lost his only child, he was forced to come back, and resume his services for the king, despite the old age. The old treasurer's pain, which was getting bigger and bigger over time, did not go unnoticed by his daughters. They wanted then to know the reason for all that sadness. However, convinced as he was that, in this regard, they could not do anything, no how was he willing to satisfy their will. But, thinking that, after all, it would be a great comfort to him to be able to share his own pain with someone who was close to him, the old treasurer decided to tell them the true reason for his anguish. So, when the father finished his explanations, the oldest daughter said, "Dear father, it is easy to find a remedy for your misfortune. You can send me instead. I just ask you to wait while I sew man's clothes for me and to give me a horse, that I will immediately take the road." But it was with an ironic smile that the father replied, "My dear daughter, how can you say that? Where do you think you are going? Even more you who, at the first crossroads, will be afraid and come back." But the young woman tried to convince her father that she was not afraid, and that she would actually arrive, without mishap, in the kingdom headquarters. Her sisters gave her support, and the father ended up giving in. She then sewed herself man's clothes, chose the best horse and, getting on it, took the road. But the father, wanting to test her daughter's courage, went ahead and hid in a forest, near the first crossroads. And when she came riding, he ran and blocked the road. Her fear was so great that she couldn't even see it was him. Thinking it was the father of the bush, she turned the horse around and galloped back. A few days after the failed attempt of the older sister, the middle sister came up with the same arguments. As the oldest sister, she also wanted to convince her father that she was not afraid, and that she would indeed achieve her goal. So, the old father decided to submit her also to the test of courage, and, as already expected, the result was the same. After these 2 unfortunate attempts, the old man suffered even more. He didn't have now any hope of getting rid of his obligations to the king, and should prepare for the return. Actually, there was still the youngest daughter, but the love he felt for her was even bigger than for the other 2, and he thought it would be hard to let her go away. Thinking about that, he was already afraid that, right after, she would come with the same request. And what he was afraid of, ended up happening. For, shortly thereafter, she stood in front of him, insisting that he let her carry out the journey. For a long time, he tried to persuade her to give up the intent, but all in vain. For, no caresses or threats could have any effect on his daughter's behavior, and he eventually gave in. But, by the hope that, like the other two sisters, she also would be afraid, and come back from the first crossroads. She then sewed herself a man's clothing, tied her slender waist with a very wide and thick belt, covered her wavy hair with a very large hat, and skillfully getting on the horse, gave it some spurs and it went flying like an arrow. From the horse's hooves, clouds of dust rose into the air, and without even thinking of danger, she went singing along the way her most favorite songs. And she didn't even notice that she was already approaching the mentioned crossroads, where her father, without her even suspecting, waited for her hidden in the woods beside there. To make her even more frightened than her sisters, he let out a very sharp and loud whistle, like the bush's father. But the brave knight didn't even care about the whistle, and continued singing. Seeing then that in this way, he couldn't frighten her even a bit, he left his hiding place and, in the manner of a robber, threatened to cut her into pieces, if she didn't stop. But, in response to those threats, and without losing her control, she just said, "Whoever it is, human being or evil spirit, come to the middle of the road, for I'm not afraid of anything." Now, the old treasurer was convinced that his youngest daughter was really courageous and brave, and that he could, without a doubt, trust her no matter how difficult the mission would be. So, coming out of his hiding place, he identified himself, hugged her warmly, and wished her good luck on her trip. But, before the separation, he also said, "Do not forget that, along the road, there will be one more crossroad. In case of doubt, follow what is indicated by your heart." Then, father and daughter hugged again and parted. End of the first chapter.